So out of these three different methods of modeling a polymorphic association, which are we going to use? Well, we're going to go with solution number 2, where we have one table of likes. It's going to have a post ID column and a comment ID column. We're then going to make sure that for each row, either the post ID or the comment ID is defined, but not both, and at least one of them actually has to be defined. So why are we using this strategy as opposed to this one over here, where we create one table for posts and one for comments? The reason is really simple and straightforward. When a user creates a like, they are saying that they like a post or a comment, and there's no other information associated with a like. There's no reaction type. There's no difference between liking a comment and a post. So we don't really need to create any extra or separate tables because we don't need to store any extra information tied to a like for a post versus a like for a comment. Later on this application, as we continue designing, we are going to come across another polymorphic association that we need to set up. And then that scenario, a user is going to have a relation to two different types of records as well. And in that scenario, we're going to create two separate tables to model that relationship because each relationship is going to have some extra information we want to store along with it. If that doesn't make sense right now, don't sweat it. Once we get there, it'll all be crystal clear. Okay, so with all that in mind, I'm going to go back over to DB diagram IO, and I'm going to add in some configuration to say that we're going to have a likes table. It's going to have an ID, user ID, post ID, comment ID, and so on. Okay, so here's our design. I'm going to add in a table of likes. We're going to say that this is going to be of type ID serial. I am going to add in a created at timestamp, but we do not really need an updated at. And the reason for that is that we don't ever plan or have any way in which we would update a like. A like either exists or it doesn't. If we ever want to unlike something, we just delete the like. So there's not really any concept of updating a like, and because of that, we really don't need the updated at timestamp. The only reason we're putting created at right here is to maybe give the user some kind of idea in the future, the order in which they liked some different comments or posts. Maybe show them the most recent like comments and posts first. That's pretty much it. Then we're going to add in here our user ID. That's going to be a reference to users.id, and I got to get my greater than in there. And then we'll add in comment ID to comments.id, and then post ID for posts.id. And that's it. So now notice that we're not going to really write anything inside of here around that check validation to make sure that either comment or post ID is defined. We'll take care of that when we actually create these tables inside of Postgres. So for right now, this is enough to just model this relationship and say there's going to be a like table, and it's going to somehow relate together user ID, comment ID, and post ID. So now our overall model looks a little something like this. So here's my users, my posts, and you can tell already it's a little bit hard to organize all this stuff. You could definitely go ahead and give it a shot. It's totally up to you how you want to kind of drag these things around to make it a little bit more clear, but if it feels a little bit hard to clearly reflect what's going on, that's totally normal. Sometimes you just have a little bit of a messy relationship and it's just a little bit challenging to properly show it inside this diagram format. Now, if it's just hard to show this stuff inside of a diagram format, that's not a sign that anything necessarily needs to change. This is a visual representation of the different relationships, and just because it's visually maybe a little bit hard to follow these different lines, that's not necessarily a sign that we need to start changing the nature of any of these relationships. Just want to throw that out there. Okay, so that looks like a reasonable solution for right now for our entire like system. Let's start to look at another screenshot in the next video, and we're going to start to model out another feature inside of our database.